What's up, everybody? This is Pye, editor-in-chief for SLRLounge.com, and welcome to another session of our weekly constructive critique. And I know, shame on me, because it hasn't been weekly for quite a while. I've taken a little hiatus because we've been working on a lot of different things for SLR Lounge, as you guys have, I'm sure, seen from the website and everything that we're doing. But, I've gotten a lot of requests to get back to this, and I agree it's something that we need to be doing. So let's get started, and without any further ado, let me show you how to get to the constructive critique area in our forum. You're simply going to go to SLRLounge.com, as you see right here. You're going to click on the forum tab right here. It'll take you over to this page, and if by scrolling down a little bit, you're going to see the constructive critique section right here. Now, once you're in our constructive critiques, I'd highly recommend, we actually ask everybody to please read this sticky on constructive critique rules. We want to make sure that this remains a positive community. Every image, we're all at different places in our careers or in this hobby, and we want to make sure that this is an uplifting community for all members. All right, so be sure to read that and follow the rules before participating. Let's get started. We have our first image right here. This was submitted by mbridge87. This is his first attempt at an HDR. It was shot on a Canon 5D Mark II with a Sigma 35 1.4 at 5.6. he thinks, and the shutter speed was varied. It was something like 9 exposures. Well, I would say for a first attempt at an HDR image, you did an absolutely wonderful job. Most people, when they approach an HDR image for their first attempt, it's really over the top candied and it looks kind of fake and it looks a little bit ridiculous. This image is great, and the reason why it's great is because despite it being a high dynamic range image, you've managed to retain highlights and shadow detail without making it over the top. With our HDR images, regardless of what we're trying to do, we always encourage people, especially in the HDR workshop, that when you're creating an HDR image, you still want to have those bright highlights. You still want to have those dark shadows, because that's what makes it look like a high contrast and realistic image. And with that, you've got that in spades here with this image. It has beautiful colors. This looks like it was shot probably during sunset, unless you happen to get up early enough to catch that sunrise, but it has beautiful colors in it. It's absolutely breathtaking from the color standpoint. Now, from an overall standpoint, as far as the image itself, I think you did a brilliant job with the HDR processing. I think you did a great job in how it was shot. I think your vision for it's awesome. I think the only thing I can really critique here is just the overall composition or the subject matter that you're shooting. With the composition itself, we have the landscape, or the horizon line is framed right on the center. And that's, generally, I want to say that's generally a no-no, but you know what? There's a lot of cases where simply it's going to look best when it is across that center line. And generally that happens when you're trying to show off a reflection or something like that, and you want it to be equal on both sides. But with this kind of a scene, you can get a little bit more creative with it. You can get a little bit lower to the ground or show some other types of foreground objects that help us to get into the scene just a bit better. So really the only critique I'd have in this image itself was just kind of the subject matter, as well as where we're trying to tell the overall story and the overall composition of it. But I think all in all, it's a great image. And for your first HDR, I think you did an absolutely fabulous job. So just keep in mind that HDR, all these techniques that we learn in post-production, they're there to enhance images that are already great. Focus on making that image great straight out of the camera as far as the subject matter, the composition, and everything from that standpoint. And then the HDR is going to be kind of the icing on top of the cake. All right, let's go on to the next image. We have Flapper Girl by Razor. This is a portrait of his niece, and I assume it's a guy, I don't know. But it's for a 20s flapper girl, and this is funny because I actually just learned right now what a flapper girl is. I didn't even know that was an actual word, so I'm learning as we go through this. So it's kind of that, it's for that reason that they use that sepia tone. Razor used a sepia tone because he kind of felt that it fit this image very well. It was shot on a Canon 7D and a 50mm lens at 1/500 of a second and at f1.8, so it's probably the nifty 50, which is a handy dandy little inexpensive lens. It was also shot at ISO 100. Now, I think this is an absolutely wonderful shot. I really can't find that much to critique about it, from the post-production style to the overall subject matter, the concept of the photo. I think it all fits very well. Now, from a photography standpoint, from a just kind of lighting and overall standpoint, I would say that there's a couple things that maybe, they draw my attention to it a little bit. And that's really this highlight that we see on her arm right here. The highlight on the dress is kind of nice, but also the strong highlights on the leg. These are kind of strong areas of contrast where my eyes are drawn to. Also, I do tend to notice a little bit of unusual dodging and burning going on. So I can see like her back shoulder falling into this shadow a little bit, where it looks like there was probably some manual dodging going on that maybe wasn't fully cleaned up. So it looks a little bit heavily produced, and what I might do is just back off a little bit on the dodging and burning, just a tiny bit. We can also see it up here right behind this tree right there. So back off a little bit on that, go with a little bit more subtle of a tone in the sepia tone, and I think you have a really great image to start with, so it actually looks awesome. I would just make that suggestion as far as the post-production to lean a little bit more on the light-handed side. From a shooting standpoint, you know, if you can do things like place her position or move around a little bit to kind of get these highlights off of the skin tones and off of certain areas where it draws a lot of attention, I think that would be helpful as well. A good way to do that is simply to use the scrim side of a reflector. If you basically take the scrim out of a 5-in-1 reflector, you can use it to simply shear light. And it's just gonna basically block the harsh light while letting some of the light through. So it's gonna be very soft and kind of matching light to the other areas of that shade right there. So just a little suggestion, but all in all, great shot. Let's keep on going to the next image. So here we have abstract image. Let's see, what is this? Abstract picture on the park with exaggerated colors. On my way back from this was shot by Q Photo. So it says, on my way back from the parking lot, I noticed this colorful change is hanging there. I decided to take kind of an abstract picture at a different angle and then exaggerate it on the post. It was shot on a Canon 7D and it was at an 18-55mm lens. Let's see, this is at 1/100th of a second, f5.6 and ISO 400. So it probably was getting, well actually it probably wasn't getting too dark. You're just at f5.6, so that had to go up a little bit to get that shutter speed. It might have been a little bit dark, maybe in the shade. And you're at 55mm. Okay, this is one of those perfect examples, I would say, of very ordinary things that we see in everyday life that look pretty dang cool as images, especially when we bring attention to them in ways that we don't see them in normal life. So getting in close on these types of objects, making them oversaturated, making them kind of crazy, and for an abstract image, I feel like this absolutely works. It looks great and it's cool. And if you had like a little smattering, like let's say you had a wall of these square tiled abstract images, this would be a beautiful one to stick right in there amongst the group. So as an abstract image, I'd say you nailed this one on the head. It's very interesting to look at, has great colors. And you know, one thing with abstract photos that I love to do is to kind of put things together with an overall concept in mind. So when I go, like let's say my family and I, we actually went to the Getty Museum recently, and I had a kind of a mindset of, I'm gonna take one lens, and rather than getting, you know, trying to capture the whole Getty Museum or something like that, I wanted to basically come back with a series of conceptual photos that I could frame on my wall. I wanted all of them to have kind of the same blue and white toning, where we had that kind of white toning in the marble versus the blue background in the sky, and I shot it that way. And we have these 6 shots now that kind of make this perfect tiled mural in our house of just this experience that we had at Getty. And it's very abstract. You wouldn't really think that that was a family trip there, but that was the vision for it. And so I'd say when you're going into these abstract sessions, shoot with some sort of final concept in mind, whether it be a product as far as like say a mural on the wall or say prints or a book, whatever it is. If you can come back with a set of these images, they look absolutely awesome when you actually put them into this final product. So great job on that. And let's head on now to the next image. We have Sir Serwinski. This is first posting, so welcome to the Constructive Critique. This is a candid shot of his girlfriend at the park, taken with a Canon 5D Mark II, 1/80th of a second at f5.6 and 400 ISO on the 24-105L lens. Let's take a look. So he said also he went for a more vintage type feel. That's why I was left faded. Cool, I dig vintage. Now, the one thing that I would say on this kind of a photo is I believe you're shooting on the 24-105. It either is, I think it's a f4 fixed. So for this kind of image, you might as well stop down to f4. That way you can bring your shutter speed up from I think 1/80th of a second that you have here to 1/60th of a second. Why, or I'm sorry, 1/160th of a second. The reason being is that with this type of shot, you're shooting your girlfriend in the action of kind of feeding these birds. Well, you kind of want to maybe freeze the motion a little bit more, or maybe you don't want to. That's just really just kind of like up to you. You know, if you want to show some of that motion, let's say you want to capture her hand in the process of throwing that bread to the goose. Is that a goose or geese? Whatever it is. All right, let's say you want to capture that motion. Then yes, 1/80th of a second is perfect because the relatively still parts of the image are going to remain still while those areas in motion will have a little bit of motion captured. And that looks great. So if that's the vision, then awesome. But if you're attempting to freeze that motion, you want to try and get the shutter speed up a little bit higher to say 1/200th of a second or even 1/250th. I mean, the higher you can go, the better. But with something like this, 1/200th to 1/250th would be pretty sufficient depending on how fast, of course, that goose is moving. And if the goose is hungry, well, it's probably moving very fast and you would need an even quicker shutter. But that's all right. So you can see a little bit of the flags in the background actually have that motion captured as well. That's it from probably the setting standpoint that I could critique. From the actual photo standpoint, there's a couple things that I would say. from taking the shot, you're out and you're just taking a shot of your girlfriend hanging out and stuff like that. And that's great. If we're looking at this from, say, a professional photo standpoint, there's a few things that I'd want to see. One is, I think we could get a more interesting pose out of our girlfriend. And I know it's going to be a little bit weird when you're standing out there and you're like, hey, honey, I know you want to feed the goose right now and that's cool, but I'd like you to do it a little bit sexier. That's kind of weird, all right? Don't do that. But you can kind of help her to stand in a way where maybe with one knee bent, more curvature in her body, so we get just a little bit more of a feminine form. We can also brush the hair back on this side of her face, so that way we can see her profile and we can see who's interacting with the geese. Also, we could do certain things like this bag right here. Sorry, that thing was in the way. This bag right here is kind of drawing quite a bit of attention. Why? Because it has text and a logo on it. So I'd probably ask her to put the bag down or at least sling it on the other side or flip it around so we don't see that. So these are things that we can do from a photography standpoint to maybe kind of give the image a little bit better production value. Also from a framing standpoint, we might not have that many options. Maybe the poles, there's really no other way to shoot this, but I would try and shoot it in a way that we don't get kind of poles or other types of elements in the shot that really don't fit in the overall scene. This is a very nature-esque scene, and having these man-made poles kind of sticking there are kind of big distractions to the image. But if there's no other option, then that's just kind of something that you're stuck with. All in all though, I dig the vintage processing. I dig everything about the photo. So great job and nice first post here in the forum. Let's go on now to the next image. Here we have Kids Portrait by Hilly330. Hilly is one of our frequenters of the blog and of the forum, so be sure to listen to what he says because his shots are awesome. His critique is great as well. So Dave shot this at ISO 100 f3.2 1/640 of a second at 200 millimeters. And Dave, I absolutely love this shot. Everything about it, from the composition to the lens choice that you used. Now, the lens choice has a very interesting play in the composition in this image. That 200 millimeter focal length is serving to basically compress the background. And what lens compression, for those that haven't heard of it, is actually a type of lens distortion. And I know it's weird to consider lens compression as a type of lens distortion, but that's exactly what it is. But it's a kind of pleasing lens distortion, where what it's doing is it's basically smooshing out the background and it's also compressing the background against our subject. So at 200 millimeters, an object that appears like, say, very far away on the horizon line would actually appear much closer to your subject matter in the frame. This is how you get those shots of people like, say, kissing under the moon, and it looks like the moon is absolutely huge because they're shooting it from a very far distance and zooming in to, say, 200 or 400 millimeters, and then they get that moon right above the couple and it's compressed so it looks much larger in the frame than it actually is. Now for this shot, the compression along with the low aperture is serving to kind of beautifully smush out this background into this wonderful bouquet that we have here. I feel so weird saying bouquet. I know it's pronounced bouquet, but I feel like I'm saying okay with a B on it. All right, the bokeh looks awesome. Bokeh de Beppo, that kind of sounds like a restaurant now, whatever. All right, so the bokeh in the background, it looks absolutely amazing. And with that compressed background, it brings all the attention to our subject and what she's doing, which is kind of creating this sandcastle. We can see the bucket in the foreground and we get this beautiful gaze, just very candid, very natural, looking directly into the camera, and then this beautiful hair light landing on her. I mean, everything about this image just works for me and it's awesome. I love processing the black and white effect. Everything is working here. So it's great. I'm not even gonna say anything more other than it's great. Keep it up, Dave. All right, let's go on to the next image. We have Self Shot by SK Khalid 93. And if I said that very Persian-like, it's because I am Persian and I must pronounce Persian names or anything Middle Eastern very Persian-like. All right, so this is a really cool shot, kind of creepy, but with the concept that you're going for, I think it's absolutely awesome. I would say this, let's actually take a look. I don't think we see the settings right here. So let's take a look at this. I think it's a beautiful concept. We have, when I look at this image, I kind of see a story behind it. Like this person, this is kind of who he is in the middle of the day. This is kind of who he is in the light. Whereas in the dark or at nighttime, this is who he becomes on the left side. Now, I would say that you can take this concept and just further refine it. It's a beautiful concept, but I think what would make it even stronger is if you had this perfectly strong line right here, that kind of where the light's basically falling off right there on the bridge of the nose, and it made this hard edge right there where it falls into shadow on the left side. I think that would look absolutely amazing. Now, the way that you would do that is you'd place, say, a softbox on the right side, and you place it at a heavy angle to the face, and then what you do is so that light gets slightly carried in the left side of the face, you're gonna add a little bit of a fill. So that way the bright light's on the right side, and then the left side, you're just adding like say a little bit of a white fill. That's gonna take a little bit of that light and push it back into the left side of the face just to give a little bit of dimension there. From a processing standpoint, I think it looks awesome. I think that what you could do with that more refined image is balance out the highlight versus the shadow a bit more. So keep the highlight a little more subdued, because right now it looks like there's certain places of the skin that might be close to blown out. Same thing with the eyes right here. So I think we can kind of refine the concept, but overall I dig and I love the concept, and I would love to see you kind of take another stab at this, try and get it more refined in camera, and then post it again and see what everybody thinks. So great job. Let's go on now to the next image. We have a teenager portrait with natural light by Q Photo. There's a shot of his son. On the first day he got a 7D. It's not that sharp, but there is some blame on the lens. And he said this was all natural light. The side of his face was illuminated from the reflection of a park table that he's sitting on. Okay, so it was shot in the 7D, 1/200 of a second at f7.1, ISO 200. It was at 210 millimeters. I'm not sure if that's a, I guess, do they have that lens? Maybe that's, I haven't heard of this lens, but it was at 210 millimeters and at f7.1. Okay, so I think this is a really nice shot. This is the first day that you got your camera, you're testing it out, you're having a good time. It's awesome. And your son's looking at you like, Dad, seriously, another photo? Are you kidding me? Which is exactly the look that kids should be giving their photographer enthusiast parents. But it's a great shot. What I would say with this shot is everything seems to be working for it. You know, you shot it at a fairly high aperture, which is gonna give you a little bit of motion blur if there's anything fast moving in this scene. So 1/200 of a second is pretty good. It's gonna freeze it enough for a portrait. But if you wanna get even sharper portraits, bring it up just a little bit more. Why? Because at at 200 millimeters, the lowest shutter speed that you should be using if you're to follow, say, the reciprocal rule is 1/200 of a second. And that means that really that's the lowest shutter speed you should be going to. And if you can, keep it up a little bit higher, because at that focal length, your hand's gonna be moving just enough where it will reduce the sharpness of the image just a bit. Okay, so at that's kind of what I have to say as far as the settings go. You could lower the aperture a bit to say f5.6. It'll even smush out the background a little bit more, and it'll also let you go up to say 1/400 of a second, which will give you slightly bit sharper of an image. Next thing, when it comes to the Lightroom editing, I think it's great. I love experimenting around with stuff, especially things like split toning and colorization and everything like that. With this type of an image, I would say generally with headshots and portraits, you're generally wanting to go with a little more subtle of a look when it comes to the editing or the production on it. With an image like this, it kind of, in my mind, doesn't work with this heavy yellow-violet kind of look to the skin tones. But if this were pulled back, let's say if it was a more of an environmental portrait with a scene, then this could work really well. Generally though, with these close-up portraits, we go for more desaturated looks, or we go for a high contrast color look that has very even skin tones. And it's difficult to do this. It does take a little bit of work inside of Lightroom and Photoshop, but these are typically more the looks that we go for. Either more kind of regular color, but with good colorization with the skin tone, or going for slightly desaturated looks with a bit of colorization. But the skin tones are a little bit kind of too crazy for my taste. But again, this is just me talking here, and I think for a first shot of your 7D on the first day, I think it's pretty awesome. So keep doing it, keep doing what you're doing and experimenting, and take this as a grain of salt. Let's go on to the next image. This is the rose that won't give up yet. All right, fairly a little depressing there. Won't give up yet, kind of a little ominous. Might be giving up sometime in the future. This is from Wasmuth. It was taken on a Nikon D600 and a Tamron 7200 2.8 at ISO 100, f6.3, 1/30 of a second, and at 135 millimeters. Now, I want to see what this image looks like. This had to have been on a tripod. Let me go back and check this out. Does it say it's on a tripod? Let's see. This rose is still flourishing with okay, the backyard, only dead one, in juniper tree. Okay, it doesn't really say. I don't know. Trying to get some nice bokeh, but the background was too close. Maybe some other technique could have fixed it. That's great. I should have read that first, because now I know what he's going for. All right. So if you're trying to get a lot of bokeh out of the lens, if you're trying to get a lot of just smushing the background, there's two things that's going to do that. One is zooming in from a further distance. So basically, instead of shooting at 135 millimeters, you would step back further and zoom all the way to 200 millimeters. Number two is keeping the aperture low. So you want to keep the aperture at f2.8, because this can actually, if this is a fixed aperture lens, it'll allow you to stay at that length, or sorry, stay at that aperture size. And the combination of zooming in all the way to 200 millimeters and shooting at 2.8, you'll end up with a background that's much more bokeh'd out. All right. The other thing that's going to do that is, like you said, the background distance between the background and the subject itself. So the further the background is from the subject and the closer you are to the subject, then the more blur that background is going to give you. Okay, so those are the three things that I'll add to it there. Now, from a photography standpoint, there's a lot of things that I love about this photo. Number one, I love the color scheme. We have this red on green color scheme, which is a great color scheme. It's a complementary color scheme, and it works very, very well. It draws all of our attention right here into this red rose, and I dig that. Now, the other side from the photography side that I'm not digging so much is kind of the distractions that I have on this same focal plane. So in the background, we have this nice kind of pine tree, it looks like, or whatever this tree is. I don't know. It's a Douglas fir. I don't know. All right, so we have this tree in the background that has this consistent texture with the leaving, but then right here off to the left, we have these kind of rose petals that really, I don't know if that's rose, but it looks like some sort of weed actually. With being on the same focal plane and being that it's a kind of different type of background or different type of a leaf from that background, it draws a lot of attention into that area. I would say for this shot, I would have probably just moved this little, if this is a weed, I would have probably pulled it. If it's not a weed, then just put something on it to kind of bring it out of the frame. That way, everything in the background stays blurred and you have this focus on this nice little rose right here with a lot of negative space, and it makes for a very artistic photo that you can do a lot with. So that's my comment as far as the photography standpoint goes. Now, as far as the shot and how it was taken, at 1/30th of a second, if you didn't tripod this, I'm amazed that it's actually as sharp as it is. Now, I would highly recommend if you're shooting at f2.8, because right now you're at f6.3, so go down to f2.8. You could probably get the shutter speed up to around, I think, let's see, if that's I don't know, like around 1/180th of a second. I'm sorry, my math is terrible. Let me see, 1/120th to 1/200th of a second, somewhere around that neighborhood, depending on well, half stops and math and all this kind of stuff that I don't want to do. All right, so getting that shutter speed up higher is going to be important because you're shooting at a fairly long focal length. And so in addition to that, not only can your hands be shaking, if there's any slight gust of wind, these objects are going to be completely blurred at 1/30th of a second. So bring the shutter speed up, bring your aperture down to that fixed aperture. You paid for all that money for that wonderfully low fixed aperture. You should use it. All right, so great shot by Wasmuth. Or Rosen by Peter Wasmuth. That makes more sense. All right, Peter, great job, Peter. Let's go ahead. We're going to go down to Chris Holtmere's string quartet. Chris is another one of our longtime frequenters of the forum, so be sure to listen to what he has to say. Great photographer, awesome posts, and this is no doubt an awesome post as well. Okay, so this was all shot, let's see, it was using it looked like it was probably shot with a fairly large light source, probably like an octabank or some sort of a parabolic or something. And I don't know if there's any information on, oh, it does say 60-inch octabank. All right, good guess. So it's a great shot. I love the lighting on this. The background works as well. It's a nice, subtle, and kind of just, well, just simple background that adds a lot to the overall image itself. Also, I love the use of the colorization. We kept this kind of very nice, warm red tone throughout the entire image, which matches very well with not only the background, but also with the type of shot that we're getting, especially with the red wood and the instrumentation. So Chris, on the lighting side, you did a fabulous job. It looks amazing. On the post-production side, you did an awesome job choosing your colors. The skin tones look nice. They look natural. Everything's awesome. On a photography side, the compositions are great. And I kind of wonder if you shot this as a composite actually, because I'm not seeing where the shadows would be falling onto each other, which makes me wonder, because it looks like the light source is coming from the top right side, just a slight angle, like right about here and coming down. So I don't see any shadows being cast onto each other. So either you placed them perfectly so they weren't casting shadows, or you shot them individually and composited them into the frame. Either way, this is a great series, a beautiful series, and we would love to feature this actually in a how we shot it. So if you'd like to submit a tutorial on that, we'll feature it on slrlounge.com. Great job. Let's go on now to our next and final image here, and this was shot again by Dave. I had to bring this one up because I thought it was an absolutely fantastic shot, and for a family portrait, this is like one of the kinds of family portraits that I would love to have myself, just of my entire family on the beach, goofing around, having a good time. I think it's wonderful, it's different, and it captures personality and everything else. It's just a fabulous photo. So let's take a look at how this image was shot, and let's see here. I want to create an album cover feel to it, so kind of like a musical album cover, and you definitely got that. There's an amazing cloud above, which created a real great mood to the shot. Any advice would be great. Shot details, let's see, ISO 100 f4 1/500 second at 26 millimeters. You know, I don't really have much to say from a critiquing standpoint on this image. I mean, it was shot very well. You shot at a high enough shutter speed to freeze most of the motion in the image. So at 1/500 second, you might have a tiny bit of motion in the arms, but you know what? You could actually use that to your benefit. You could even go down to say 1/250th of a second if you did want to capture some of that motion. I think it looks great. From a compositional standpoint, it's awesome. You know, from the family and where way they're posed, you maybe can bring this kid in just a little bit over onto this side, maybe kind of bring in the distance a little bit over on this side too, so there's kind of fairly even spacing, but I also kind of like the whimsical nature of it. I love the low perspective, the horizon line right on that 1/3 with a focus or 2/3 of that frame, really focusing on the clouds and on the family, because this is where our attention should be. I love the processing. It's a great job processing it black and white with a nice dramatic mood to it. Looks like you burned the top of the clouds a little bit, which is awesome as well. I think everything really works. Now, what I would say that I would hope that you did in this set of photos as well is captured some shots from, did I say capture? I'm getting all Sean Connery-esque on you right now. All right, so captured some shots with a little bit more of faces showing. So maybe shooting from a different angle where you can capture the faces, where you can capture different types of close-ups and so forth. Now for a wide shot from the back, I think this is perfect. It's beautiful, and it would go into the album very well. I'm just saying hopefully you supplement that with also some close-ups, with other types of shots, with some other portraits and so forth from different angles to kind of help supplement and add to this scene. All right, so great job, Dave. Great job to everybody that has submitted. Once again, if you want your images critiqued, be sure to submit them to the forum at slrlounge.com. My name is Pye, and I'll see you all in the next video.